to determine someone's ethical ability to carry out the practice of law.
I think that's a great comment. And I think that's the benefit to having two co-op members on Blue Ribbon, is that when we do have that draft report, that will be the time for us to add things like that, making sure that they go into the final report.
Yeah, I will make sure we raise that.
Thank you.
This is a good point. Yeah, I mean, to reciprocity, we really spent a lot of time talking about the fact that because we don't have it now, that really, you know, that we feel like if we open up, and the discussion was robust, as Audrey said, about reciprocity, both for US, you know, attorneys licensed somewhere else, and then foreign attorneys. And it really, I think people really thought, like, we don't give reciprocity, and that hinders, you know, that hinders our ability to get it other places.
Yeah.
And that if we open it up, then other states are going to be more receptive to us. Yeah.
And it may increase diversity
Well,
in our
right,
state
right.
by attracting people that didn't previously live here because it's prohibitively expensive in
Right.
some ways, you know, to
Right.
know that they can come here and practice. So.
Anecdotally, I'm New York licensed, not California.
Sounds pretty
I
fun.
don't practice. It was pre-UBE, I'll just say that. I don't practice here, and I just told my fiance, like, we gonna figure life out, but what I'm not doing is taking another bar exam. So, you
Right,
know,
so-
that there is also that people move for other industries.
Right.
Of course, I maintain my active license, but people move for other industries, and it might be thoughtful about what that looks like.
Well, right, I mean, and we talked a lot about that, just how the world also looks very different now than it did, you know, 25 years ago. And that people move now and you know, move about the cabin very differently than they did before. And that you don't stay at the same place for 25 years, unless you're Heather or but you know, you don't stay necessarily with the same employer, and people move for lots of reasons. So, I mean, I think that was part of the reciprocity thinking.
Well, sign me up.
Yeah, for the commission, I will. Here they are. Yeah. Other questions? For folks who may have missed the last meeting, and if, I don't know if Ryan can hear me, but the BRC did not find common ground on the non-exam pathway situation. And you may have heard Leah mention earlier that the state bar is recommending, one of the many recommendations to the Supreme Court is that the provisionally licensed folks have this sort of non-exam pathway, and that we use that group as a test case for whether a non-exam pathway works. That is not something that the Blue Ribbon Commission was in favor of or particularly supported. And I know that Ryan and I both had conversations with Leah about what we thought on behalf of co-op, what we thought about that. And I know I've talked, and so has Ryan, about our concerns about the way the non-exam pathway was proposed and why it was proposed that way. So I don't want to sort of belabor that, but Leah mentioned it earlier. So I just wanted to let you know that Ryan and I had both spoken to her before she made the recommendation, and, you know, they still made the recommendation, but, you know, we went on record as saying that wasn't something that we as BRC or co-op members thought was a good idea.
How large is the cohort of PLLs?
It's a couple.
120, I believe.
I was gonna, thank you.
Okay.
No, I was gonna say, it's not huge. Which is part of why we didn't want it to be used as a test case, and also it's very specific, right? It's not, you know, when we've contemplated a non-exam pathway, the idea for those who are pitching the non-exam pathway is not, it is, you know, we'll open it up to everyone, and those who, you know, those who want it can take it. And And so it would be it's very different than these PLL folks who were, you know,
In a moment in time.
who were in a specific
circumstances,
moment in
yeah.
time, who had a specific, you know, score, like, you know, on the exam, or already take, you know, like that's a very specific group in a very specific moment in time. And my concern and Ryan's concern was that using that group and extrapolating, you know, was not statistically a particularly sound way of saying a non-exam pathway is a great idea because it worked for these 120 people. Or it didn't. And also we don't have data moving forward about, you know, about those folks. You know, how many of them, you know, will get complaints filed in the first 5 years or, you know, or any of those things, so.
Job prospects as
Right,
well.
well, right, I mean, all of it, right, I mean, those are some of the concerns we had about a non-exam pathway, is that it really, we're more concerned that it puts, especially, lawyers of color at a disadvantage. Because if it creates a two-tier system and we push this idea, and certainly the law schools that are in favor of it are pushing it for students of color, as a way of getting, you know, licensed, that we actually are making it more difficult for them to get a job. And creating a system that hurts them more than it helps them. So. Yeah. Anybody else have questions on this? Nope. Seeing none, thank you, Audrey.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Nice to see you all.
Especially for staffing this group, which is a contentious group, and could use the civility guidelines, and decorum rules.
It's been a really great learning experience for me as a staff person, so I don't mind.
Okay, and I'm certain that's true, that it was a learning experience. Thank you, Audrey, thanks for your work.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
Thanks, Audrey.
Elizabeth Hom, are we back to you?
Yes, so we
Yay.
are on,
The retention,
yes, item 7.8.
excellent.
Addressing retention in the legal profession through law school loan repayment. And so we talked about, Leah mentioned that at the very top of the meeting, many hours ago now, that, you know, COAF COAF members participated in a working group with members of the Legal Services Trust Fund Commission and the California Access to Justice Commission to examine, you know, various options for loan repayment assistance programs. And, you know, we're very hopeful that there would be some funding included in the governor's budget, but that did not come to fruition. So we will continue to explore ways to move this forward. And so we'll likely reconvene that working group in the new year.
Heather and I are very interested. Any questions on the LREP stuff? Okay.
Okay.
7.9.
So this is an update on the early pipeline to the profession outreach materials development. And so we are continuing to work on a video and hope to do that in the new year.
Yeah,
Okay.
we're
Great.
still on track.
On track.
Yep.
Okay. Perfect.
I like the question
Yes.
in your voice.
I assumed, but I actually did not confirm with Heather, but yes.
Okay, awesome. Questions for them about that? Okay, Ryan, I don't know if you can hear us. If you can't hear us, we can skip you and come back to you. But you are up on the imposter syndrome resources. We'll skip you. We're gonna skip you, Ryan. We're gonna go to Elizabeth doing the implicit bias.
So yeah, item 7.11, implicit bias online MCLE. So last meeting we did convene a working group, and I believe it's not in my notes, even though I looked it up. Oh, Angelica and Novella are part of my working group. Just need to turn the page. And so we will reach out to you in January to start kind of the discussion on what we might like to do. And I just wanted to raise two issues that perhaps the group wanted to weigh in on related to an implicit bias online module As Kathy had in her presentation earlier today, you know, incivility is often a manifestation of bias. And so there may be something related to that to include in a module. And then often the impact of implicit bias may be a magnifying effect to imposter syndrome. And so that may be also something for us to keep in mind as we explore an additional module to develop. So just want to put that out there to the group if there was any reaction or additional thoughts for the working group to consider.
Thank you. Questions about that? Thoughts?
I just wanted to say that imposter syndrome came up in our separate conversation around the implicit bias resource page. Or no, sorry, implicit bias came up in the conversation about the imposter syndrome research. I flipped them, which shows that they are
Yes.
potentially integrated. And so I really think it's a very good idea. And to the extent you all do it, and I'm sure you will, to think about the sort of the other forms of bias that we kind of clump in with implicit bias, so confirmation, stereotype bias, et cetera, and the ways that those things might manifest by the person towards themselves and in an in-group fashion, as well as towards people from another group, which you may not identify with.
Right. That's a good point. Thanks for bringing that up. Anybody else on this? Ryan, are you with us yet?
Just this picture.
Just his good-looking picture that we've been staring at, talking about over here. It's a good-looking picture Ryan's got there. Sal, yours is really good too. But
Yes, that was a good picture.
Sal's is really good too. So is Olga's. I'm glad mine's not up there. It's not as good. Okay. Still no Ryan, so we will skip to. You want me to skip to 12? Okay. So we'll skip to 7.12, which is an update on the adoption of the ABA Resolution 102. And I'm going to do that for us. So as a quick refresher, in August of 2021, the ABA adopted Resolution 102, which urges members to devote at least 20 hours a year to efforts that advance and promote DEI in the legal profession. You may remember that at the last meeting, we discussed whether this requirement was something that we should mirror in California. At this time, we are continuing to explore options on implementation and reaching out to other entities like CLA about their interest in adopting 102 moving forward. That is all I think I have on that. Any questions about, oh, there's Ryan, yay. Any questions about that? Okay, good. Then Ryan, we're gonna come to you if you are ready on the imposter syndrome resources.
Yes, so we're still in the beginning stages of this process. We've teamed up with the Lawyers Assistance Program, and they've dedicated staff to this. And there are also folks over at UC Davis, a sociology professor by the name of Bruce Haynes, who's looking in and has done a lot of research on imposter syndrome, and the King Hall Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Fellow, Alexis Elston, who has demonstrated her interest in helping the state bar gather resources and issue spot and help develop this website. And so we had one meeting for the working group to discuss our approach, what this is going to look like. And I don't think, at least I don't have on my calendar the next meeting. Maybe it was, but I didn't tell you guys, I switched employers. So I'm no longer doing defense employment work. I'm doing plaintiff's employment work at a new firm. So all of the stuff on my calendar at Jackson Lewis is not on my calendar at Weber Law Group. And so we're gonna have another meeting soon, where we're gonna bring in those individuals at UC Davis into the working group, and we're gonna start really developing and hashing out what this resource page is gonna look like. Kathy Ongiri, who presented earlier, is also heavily involved with this process. And that's really all I have right now. As previously mentioned during prior COAF meetings, this page is gonna provide resources for law students and attorneys who are dealing with imposter syndrome. We are still talking about whether or not we want to call it imposter syndrome or something else, because there is a new debate about that phrase and how it doesn't reflect, I guess, what people are experiencing. But generally, it's just substantial and debilitating self-doubt that manifests itself in ways like for example, substance abuse or depression, things that could result in attorney misconduct that then results in attorney discipline or disbarment, right? And so things like that we want to really get ahead of and get in front of if we have the opportunity. With respect to law students, they could drop out of law school. In the case that sparked my interest in this whole project, there was actually a law student who had a summer associate position at a big firm. And while there, the other folks in the firm and the other summer associates did not look like her. She questioned her existence at that firm. And even though she had excellent academic credentials and ability, she was so mentally handicapped that she couldn't even compose a simple email because she doubted herself so much. She did not get the offer to return for the second summer. She did not get a job offer. And she's still dealing with imposter syndrome. I spoke to her yesterday. She passed the bar, she failed the bar exam on the first try. I asked her if she had taken the state bar program that deals with imposter syndrome-like symptoms for bar exam takers. She said no, so I directed her to that resource, and hopefully that helps her. But that's what's going on with this whole project. We're still in the beginning stages of ironing out what that website's going to look like, but we have a team together, and so we're going to move forward with that.
And I would just add that this imposter syndrome specific resources is part of a larger resource that's going to be available to licensees. I think Leah alluded to it earlier this morning that a lot of work that we're moving forward is more proactive versus reactive, trying to provide resources to licensees, law students before they perhaps might enter the attorney discipline system. So and also kind of just, on this slide, there's like some ideas that the working group had talked about, and including one thing that I thought was particularly would be particularly useful to make available is some kind of toolkit or framework to facilitate discussions about imposter syndrome for maybe for someone to take in a law firm or any other employment situation to kind of raise awareness to the issue.
Heather, because I was just going to say, it's not unique to the practice of law, right? I mean, it permeates every industry. And so I believe, like Shalak, like not in reinventing the wheel. I wonder if we can look at other professions, or if we already have, where they've been able to make progress in that space and utilize and leverage some of their learnings there to apply in our profession. So
yeah, that's a great suggestion, Heather. What kind of sparked, or I guess fortified, my desire to have this project under COAF is that this student, my mentee, asked me if I can help her find resources that she could read, like scholarly resources, academic resources, so she can kind of read about what's going on with her. And there was like nothing that was, academic in nature on the internet. Everything was just kind of anecdotal, and we didn't even know if it was vetted. And so if we could find other sources that are vetted, that the experts know is accurate and substantiated with data and whatnot, that's the kind of stuff that we want to provide, because we don't want to give or refer people to something that is not accurate.
and I think going back to the leadership seal, having leadership at these various places really communicate that everyone who has been selected to be there was selected with purpose. I mean, I think just hearing that from the top levels starts to eliminate some of that back channel conversation in these environments early on, right? Because if no one ever expresses that, but we all know there's a very rigorous process to getting into any of the professions that we all sit in, right? They don't just hand out those jobs on the corner, like but people act like that once they get in. And so I think a reminder of you went through a strenuous process to get here, and you wouldn't have made it this far had you not, it is something that we should just constantly remind at every stage of that. You wouldn't have gotten into this school. You wouldn't be sitting for the bar exam, even if you don't pass it the first time. There, at every part, there was a purpose that you already crossed over, a bridge to. And so not to be discouraged. And I think just the reinforcement of that is maybe something we want to encourage people to do and make part of the seal process and future iterations, even if it's not in the inaugural one. So.
Absolutely. And when Kristen and I think Michael Rose was involved in the conversation, we were kind of brainstorming this project with the Chief Justice, right? And her response was great idea with respect to herself. At every stage of her evolution and ascension, she experienced new bouts of imposter syndrome. Like, so if it affects her, it affects everyone, right? Because this is the Chief Justice, right? So I think this is just a great project that I'm really excited about, and there's more to come.
I just want to affirm what Ryan said, then I'm also in this working group and the next meeting has not yet been scheduled. And we were talking about like early after this meeting, certainly, I think they were going to circulate something for scheduling. I think Ryan, we had talked about just with the academia schedule early January to bring the other academics into this conversation. So just affirming that you're not forgetting things that were not on your calendar, Ryan, it has not yet been scheduled. Yes. And congratulations on your move. Yes.
Thanks. I'm a plaintiff's attorney now, so if you guys know anyone.
Welcome to the right side. Just kidding.
Great. Anybody else have thoughts on the imposter syndrome resources? And I appreciate your work on that. It's really important.
Can I just make a comment? Ryan,
Yes.
for as long as we've been on, you've talked about this, and just bravo to you for doing this, for bringing this to the forefront of our committee here and doing this. And congratulations. And anything I can do to help you there, especially on the side, if you need any resources in Spanish or that have a particular specificity towards the cultural barriers that because like you, I mentor a lot of students who are in that zone where they don't feel they belong or they feel they're not really where they should be. I have a mentee who just got a job at a really prestigious firm in San Francisco. She hasn't even started yet. She's already thinking she's going to fail because she doesn't think she belongs here. It's like, so, it's cultural things where if that helps you, I'm happy to give you whatever I find.
Absolutely, it will. So yes, Sal, if you find anything, shoot it my way. If you want to give me a call, we can talk about it, anything. Thanks.
Thanks, Sal. That's awesome. And then, Novella and then Stephanie.
Yeah, Heather's comment reminded me when I started law school, I remember the dean of the law school did an event. It was Elena Kangan at the time, where she basically told everyone, like, you deserve to be here, like, you've made it. Part of me was like, this is so cheesy, like, it's just gonna make us all feel entitled. But I did try to receive her message of I deserve to be here, and that so that I wouldn't be battling that throughout my 3 years at law school. And they also had a ritual where they had us go to the law library and sign this book that every person who is enrolled at the law school signs, and they talk to us about all of the great things you'll do when you graduate and stuff like that. And I wonder if that effort of instilling that sense of belonging / entitlement when it's ugly was actually founded on changing people's mindset. And I wonder how much it actually helps in terms of I felt for me anecdotally, personally, that I was okay, well, I do belong here and I'm not gonna fight that during my time at the school. But I wonder if there's other things that employers and law schools can do, similar to what Heather was saying.
Can I get in line behind Stephanie?
Yeah, you can get in line. Okay. Do you want, do you
Well,
want to respond to
I'll
that?
just
Because I know you
very
do
quickly,
something.
Novella, say that that is actually something. I was speaking at a conference in both June and November where this came up for both panels I was on, and it is something that in the academy, at least from the deans of students side, everyone is making a very concerted effort. We are all also making an effort not to, some of you may remember you start law school and they say like, everybody here has a 4.0 and a 170, blah, 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 right? And they make it sound like you're all the smartest people that ever walked the earth. And we're making an effort not to do that, not only because of the entitlement, because then they walk around thinking they're so smart and we're like, dude, you don't know what anything is. But also because for the person who's sitting there and going, I did not have a 4.0 and I have a 152, and how did I get in this place? It's reinforcing imposter syndrome where we're thinking the data would undermine the imposter syndrome. So we are just working, we have been in conversation about through orientations and other means, finding the other ways to show people that they are in a place where they are supposed to be and they earn their spot. Because we also recognize that LSAT in particular and GRE secondarily are not good measures systemically for various disadvantaged groups at different times. But that is like a movement that's happening in the law school space, is starting from the first day saying, you're supposed to be here. And if I can take 2 more minutes anecdotally, I was telling Judge Kristen over lunch that while sitting here, we have one else there in their second exam today. And one of my mentees, she texted me an hour before the exam starts going, what happens if I get a D? And my response to her was, I'm not entertaining that question. You are not going to get a D, so go focus on your final and stop asking me like questions that I'm not going to. Why are we having this conversation? Why have you already assumed you're getting the worst grade in the class? And so as much as we can tell them when they get in, you're supposed to be there, we're also reminding, and to those you mentor in an ongoing way, that you are supposed to be here, you are as smart as the people sitting around you, and they're not worried about getting the D, so why are you?
And even if you get it, it's not the end of the world.
You won't
It's
die.
just-
Your mentor's a dean of students, I'm not gonna let you get all that.
Be fine, right?
And anecdotally, she also said your mentor is a dean of students.
Like, I'm not gonna let you fail out, calm down. So.
Stephanie's got her hand up.
Yeah, Stephanie and then Heather.
So first of all, I want to apologize, Ryan and Shalak, for not making the last working group meeting. I had COVID, which is a delight. And you know, maybe this is more appropriate for a working group discussion, but just while it's fresh in my mind, I don't know if we've talked about putting like testimonials, and maybe that's not the right word. But you know, just hearing your story about the Chief Justice and how at every stage she's experienced something, it would be really neat if we had on the resources page, like, you know, some for law school, some for taking the bar, some for junior attorney in a big firm, some for, you know, nonprofit work or whatever else, because I think part of what would help somebody suffering from imposter syndrome is just feeling that like normalization, right? Like if all these other people feel it, you know, and really putting more like a name to the face instead of just generally like lecturing, like, oh, you know, the most successful CEOs feel it and our Chief Justice feels it, you know. I don't know. So I think that would be helpful.
Absolutely. That is one of the 3 main pillars of this page that I suggested.
Oh,
Was
great.
to have the testimonial videos, to have the written academic resources, and then to have the reference to, if you're experiencing this, here's where you can go to get help, right? And so to have like experts, psychologists, maybe not specific ones, but maybe we can say, this is the type of psychology that you should see, right? Something like that on the page. LAP is turning this website into much more than just an imposter syndrome website. They want to highlight other issues, which I guess is fine, because the more the merrier. But my impetus for this was imposter syndrome. And so as long as that gets addressed, I'm happy with it. I also wanted to share another situation that just recently happened to me, and it's why I left my firm. It's this whole gaslighting. And I had to Google what gaslighting means. It means, I think, stirring self-doubt into somebody about their own ideas and opinions and making them question themselves, which is kind of like imposter syndrome. And like what I was experiencing, was, I went into law because I know for a fact that I'm going to become an excellent world-class trial attorney, right? And that's what I wanted to do. And they're like, oh, well, we don't think you're ready to be a trial attorney because you've got to be practicing for like 15 years, and all this other stuff, right? I'm like, no, that's BS, right? And then just that kind of planting the seeds of doubt, you're not ready, you can't do it. That creates imposter syndrome. And someone like me just flat out rejected it and said, I'm out. And now I'm about to do a trial next month, right? And so that's pretty much my recent experience with that, because for a moment there, it almost got me.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for sharing that too, Ryan.
Thanks.
No, but Heather, and it's hard to tell.
As much as I said, it's not a unique, that imposter syndrome is not unique to this profession. I do think the competitive nature of our profession that starts from law school, right? Elevates it in some ways that, maybe other professions don't. And when I was in law school, I participated in a experiment where we took a class over at the business school, and I was really impressed by the collaborative way that we had to participate in that activity, because that's the way I like to work, versus the competitive way that you're taught to participate in law school. Now, it was interesting to hear the business students say that they considered that problematic because your grade is dependent on everyone doing well. But I think some adoption, and this is beyond the purview of co-op, but in each of our spheres of influence, the adoption of leave no one behind is like, if someone is feeling like they're an imposter, that's your fault. Like, why aren't we making sure everyone, the whole, rising tides lift all boats? So there shouldn't be anyone at your company, at your firm, at your practice area that feels like they shouldn't be there, or we are all failing as an entity. And so I think changing the mindset around that, instead of shaming and making people feel like they don't belong, it's like, wow, where's our responsibility in all of this to ensure that the people that we brought in the door, whatever that door is at the current moment in time, they feel like they belong here, and we're encouraging them and supporting them in all the ways. And again, I throw everything into the leadership skills. There's another thing we should be asking them about. But until then, we can all be doing that in our own places, right? Just making sure people change the mindset on that. So, because I almost feel like there's an assumption now that everyone feels imposter syndrome when they walk into something instead of the opposite. And why would we assume the negative? So.
Right. Yeah.
Yep.
And then, I don't really like the name imposter syndrome, but it's the name that exists right now. Maybe we can invent it. I don't know. We can talk about that.
Yeah, it has a negative connotation.
Yeah.
Shalak has
I just wanted to share a statistic that I share with the students. Per the ABA last year, 0.39% of the entire US population is a licensed attorney.
wow.
And per the ABA last year, just approximately like 0.6% of the entire US population has a JD. And so I share that with the students to say less than 1% of the population has even gotten to where you are. So like, I don't care whether you end up at Disney or Jones Day, or you start your own shop, or you're sitting on a corner holding up a sign saying, we'll do legal work for 25 cents. You've beat out like 99% of the population to do this thing. And that is a big deal, right? And so I just thought, whether it's with your mentee, Ryan, or others, that is a number that is concrete. Less than half of 1% has even gotten to where you are. And that means that there is something special for you being in the place that you're in. And like, it doesn't matter whether you go to Cal accredited, unaccredited, ABA, Harvard, wherever.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So.
That's a great point, and I'm thinking I need a more professionally diverse friend group. I feel like I know a lot more people a lot more attorneys.
Which again skews your perception, right?
Right,
Right.
excuse my perception when I hang out with all of you.
I also use it for reputation and say that means it's a really small community, and so you've got to act right.
I like that too. I like that. too.
Civil. It's sort of a civil.
It's all related.
It is. Olga.
Sorry, I don't know if it's appropriate for me to have so many opinions as you're sharing ideas and like, I want to do that, I want to help those. But one thing I found very effective when I started a doctoral program at USC, the very first class, the very first session, what they had us do was an assignment called a failure resume. And we had to present all the things that we had failed at and then how we had overcome them to still end up in a doctoral program at USC, right? So it was the opposite of what we're taught to do, which is say we're the best at and highlight all of our best attributes. And that kind of suppresses sometimes your challenges that you've overcome. And so this was an assignment in a class with, I don't know, about 30 people, and we all had to present over the course of the semester. And not only did it help us see that everybody's got failures, right? It actually connected us in a human way because some of our failures were the same, or we could relate. And so it broke down barriers of gender, race, age, all kinds of things, because we had to be vulnerable to be able to say like, yeah, this bad thing happened in my life, but here I am, right? And how did you get there? And so it's self-reflective, but also like it built unity in a group that otherwise had not had any shared experiences. So I became a firm believer in that because since I went through that, like I sit in a room, I'm like, I am as smart as these people, right? Because they're just not telling me all the ways that they've struggled, but they have had struggles. We all do. So I am a big advocate for offering that experience when it's relevant to people who might be feeling like they're not sure if they're going to cut it here, wherever here is. So planting that seed, I'd be happy to work with whoever. I mean, I'm new at CLA, but you know, that might be something we offer in terms of like an orientation for all new attorneys, right? That how you are vulnerable is also it shows strength and builds your inner strength, which is what you need every single day, whether you're at the grocery store, the gym. I mean, that's one of the most intimidating places you ever go is the gym, right? But you have to have self-confidence. And how do you get that? And I found that failure resume to be one of the most impactful experiences that I'd ever had in all the different leadership things I'd ever done. So offering that as an idea if you haven't had a chance to do it yet.
I love that. And anonymized, that's a different version of the testimonials, right? Because you could say, this is from a lead partner at a top 10 firm and nobody would know who it was, but this is all the things and post those kinds of things on the website too. So
yeah,
I love that.
That's a great idea. And fun. We're going to do that at dinner later.
And then celebrate that we all made
So
it.
we're all here together anyway. I like that. That's a great idea. Thank you, Olga. I really appreciate that. Okay, other thoughts on the imposter syndrome before we move on? Okay. Seeing none, do we want to review the co-op work plan now, or do you want to go to the liaison reports? What would you like to do, Elizabeth?
Well, the work plan's always attached to our agenda, just if we need to refer to it.
Okay.
But I do just want to highlight that the board typically approves the work plan for the year in March. So at our next meeting on February 23rd, I believe. 24th, thank you.
You wrote it down.
Okay. We
In my
will,
agenda.
we will go through it very carefully to kind of set our agenda for the year.
Great. Okay, on our agenda, 7.14 is discussion of additional diversity and inclusion initiatives, as if we're not doing enough. Does anybody have other things that they want to talk about or add or put on our radar? No, everyone's pretty full up. Okay, well, you know, that's always something that's on our agenda, so if something does come up, maybe think about, jot it down or send me and Elizabeth an email and we can put it on next time's agenda. Okay, moving to our liaison report. Lauren and Olga, you both have been here with us all day and we're so super appreciative that you hung in there with us. And if you would like to do CLA's report, now would be a great time.
Wonderful, thank you. I don't have all that much to report out, but the primary report out was the addition of Olga Diaz to our professional team. So you all know she introduced herself at the beginning of the call. And I'll rattle off a few more topical updates, but I'll definitely turn it over to Olga in case there's anything specific she'd like to share with the group. I believe last time that I was with you all, I shared that one of our committees, the Diversity Outreach Committee, was working on an event in the Bay Area to energize young Black men to not only go to school, but to complete their education to go on to law school. And the reason this project was top of mind was because there's been a decrease in the admission and retention of Black men in California law schools. So we have made some headway, specifically with the Bay Area. And I want to take a moment of pause and thank you for reaching out to offer some assistance for both the Bay Area and the LA programs that I had mentioned last time. The report that I didn't provide in the interim was that we decided to back burner the other programs and just focus on the Bay Area for now. And we've had conversations with the Golden State Warriors, and they're taking a very hands-on approach. So we aren't going to have an opportunity to include external folks for this Bay Area program, but as soon as we have program information available that I can circulate, I'll be sure to get that into Elizabeth's hands. I'll also share that CLA is still considering some potential revisions to our own internal appointments policy. Our DEI committee has been hard at work at that for almost 2 calendar years. So it's included board feedback, getting formal section comments, and now we're revisiting the board, hoping to get a vote on that. So again, I can relay what that policy might be if it is adopted or revised to Elizabeth once we have some more concrete information there. I shared last time that CLA strategic plan has been adopted, which includes an entire pillar, 1 of 6, dedicated to championing DE&I. And that is really where Olga is going to be providing strategic oversight and guidance. So with that, I'll turn it over to Olga in case there's anything she'd like to add.
Well, thank you. Lauren's been fantastic as I've onboarded. She's just been such a wealth of information. And so it's appropriate to recognize her today because it is her birthday and she has been at work all day. So happy birthday, Lauren.
Happy birthday,
Thank you.
Lauren.
So there could be cake and cookies if we were all in the same room, but here we are. So I don't have any additional updates. I'm just still trying to get my feet under me at CLA and figuring out internally what DEI efforts are necessary, and then for our membership and then statewide. So I've been reading a lot of the work that's been not only reported on here today, but everything I can get my hands on in terms of what's already been done. And I'd really appreciate some assistance in finding gaps, like where are we not doing enough? Because there's so much good work happening that I'd really like to not duplicate that, but rather supplement. So any ideas you have are absolutely welcome. And at some point in the future, you will see me offer more substantive input. But today I was just very grateful to be with you, and thank you for sharing of yourselves and of all of the data. I'm really impressed.
Thank you, Olga. And the last thing that I'll share with the group, and by no means am I trying to steal the thunder of the Judicial Council. One of the projects that we're working on collaboratively, in addition to with the California Judges Association, is wrapping up some of the loose ends from the 2021 Judicial Diversity Summit. That report has been finalized. The Judicial Council has had an opportunity to review it and has even identified some of their potential next steps to further the recommendations that are within the report. CLA is going to be presenting to our own Board of Representatives in January, and we'll have updates soon for the partners, or the 3 organizations that have been working on the summit, about how CLA plans to participate, and also what a rollout to the larger legal community of that report will look like, so we can do it in an organized way that will cultivate buy-in and actionable steps. So we're looking forward to that.
Great. Thanks, Lauren. And thank you, Olga, for being here and being patient. And I think Heather has a question.
For the program for the young Black men in the Bay Area, what is the age range that you're targeting, or stage that you're targeting?
Great question. Our target audience are high school students and community college students and undergrad students.
And are you partnering even from an amplification standpoint with 100 Black Men and the Charles Houston Bar Association?
There isn't a formal partnership, but we do have individuals who are connected or directly affiliated with both of those organizations who plan to help us get the word out.
Okay. Okay, sounds excellent.
That sounds great. Yeah, please let us know.
Yeah, let us know any way we can help you.
Absolutely.
And when did you say the report would be out on the judicial summit?
It has been published, but not fully publicly. I think I'm not sure what the correct vocabulary here is, but the Judicial Council has a sub entity that has reviewed it in its entirety. And I would be happy to share that with Elizabeth currently.
And just to add, I know that Judge Dulcich, who wasn't able to join us today, does plan to report out on it at our
Okay.
February meeting.
Fantastic. Great. And it was a really great, I know I already said this to you, Lauren, once before, but it was a really great summit.
Thank you for participating.
Thank you for having me. It was really, I mean, I know it only happens every few years and the reason why it can only happen every few years is because it's so polished and so good, you couldn't possibly do that every year. There's no way you would have the time. So I'm really looking forward to the report. So thank you for sending that to Elizabeth. Okay, any other questions for Olga or Lauren? Seeing no one. Okay, so next on our agenda was Pam Enslin from California Law, but I don't see Pam. And
Can
don't-
I do a
Yeah.
small, I'm obviously
Yes.
not Pam, but
You are not.
I am a partner school with Cal Law Pathways and just want to highlight to everyone that the summit is in February. And so to the
Here
extent
in Southern California
Here
at
in
USC, right?
I'm not commenting, and so.
I'm not going because it's not at Pepperdine.
Thank you, Judge Rose.
I was
Um,
invited, but I'm not going because.
But no, we are to the extent that we all care about pipeline work.
Yeah.
That summit is going to be a wonderful time and participating in that program is one of the highlights of what I get to do in the overall Cal Law Pathways program. So if any of you get the opportunity to participate, I really encourage you.
Okay,
Yeah,
we
go.
can talk about going. Okay. Yeah, and I sit on as a liaison to Cal Law from COAF and like I said, Cal Law meeting was how I learned about the history of COAF. I think I mentioned that at the beginning, and the incredible people that have sat where we are sitting now. And so, you know, many of you know this about me, but I am a big believer in understanding your history and knowing where you came from and really and really moving us forward by celebrating where we came from and those who came before us. So I will work with Ruthie and the folks at Cal Law to try and put something together on COAF, on the history of COAF, so that we can have that available. Okay, so no Pam and no Pat. So thank you for that update on the law school summit. And then as Elizabeth said, Judge Dulcich is not with us today, but she will be here in February to provide us with an update, hopefully. And Elizabeth, I see nothing else on my annotated agenda. Did I get us out of here before 4?
Yeah.
I did.
Even with robust discussion.
Even with robust discussion, you know, Sarah, how did I do? I know. What is Sal?
He's on a movie screen.
I know that Sarah likes a fast moving meeting, so.
The end of the movie.
And
The end of the
appreciates a
movie.
fast moving meeting. And Sal's in a movie now. So, you know, we're not gonna see each other again until February, at least not as a big group. And so, you know, I want to take a moment to wish everyone a lovely holiday season. Please stay safe. It sounds like Stephanie's already had COVID, so maybe she's good for a little bit. But, you know, please, yeah, don't try to get that. Please stay safe. Have a lovely holiday season. It is lovely to be here in person with some of you and hopefully all together again in June. All right, anybody else have anything, Elizabeth, anything else housekeeping wise?
No.
Okay, my friends, it is lovely to see you all. Until we see each other again, stay safe.
Happy Christmas, everyone.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
holidays.
Thank you.
Happy holidays, everyone. Be safe.
Bye.
Happy Kwanzaa.
Happy Kwanzaa.
Happy Hanukkah.